Hello everyone and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady and today I would like to give you a preview of my first impressions of the new Psychic Awakening book, Ritual of the Damned. This book contains new rules for Dark Angels, Grey Knights, and Thousand Suns, and in this video I'm going to go over the Grey Knight stuff from the book that I think is interesting, fun, or that I think will be seen in competitive tournament lists in the future. I'll have either a single separate video or two separate videos for the other two factions after this one. This book is available for pre-order starting today and will be officially released next Saturday. So before we get into the meat and potatoes of this video, I want to thank Games Workshop for sending me out a review copy of this book so that I can give you guys and gals a preview of what's in it, and also so I can give you some of my thoughts on the competitiveness of these new rules. I am also incredibly excited about this book as well, since 2 out of the 3 armies in this book are armies I own and play, being Grey Knights and Thousand Suns. After we go through all the litanies, stratagems, spells, and everything that Grey Knights get in this book, I'm going to give some overall thoughts on how I personally think that Grey Knights should be built and how I can see them being played going forward, at least when trying to be played competitively. And really quickly, spoiler alert, I do think Grey Knights will be decently competitive now. Probably not top tier, but definitely playable. They're nowhere near as bad as they were before this book. And one last thing to mention before we actually get into the main content of this video, I'd like you to please note that I will be making a lot of comparisons of these new Grey Knight rules to Space Marine rules, because Space Marines are the new boogeyman of the meta right now, so you kind of need to be able to deal with Space Marines in order to be viable, or at least be as good as Space Marines in order to be viable. So that's the angle I will be approaching this video and my opinions with. So let's begin and get into the content you guys and gals clicked on this video for. So to start off, Grey Knights get Shock Assault and Bolter Discipline as official rules in a rulebook now, instead of just as an FAQ edition. This is something we all expected, since those are rules that every Imperial Space Marine chapter has. Unlike every other Space Marine chapter though, Grey Knights don't get combat doctrines, but instead they gain a new rule called Masters of the Warp, which is very similar to combat doctrines. Grey Knights only benefit from the Masters of the Warp rule if every model in their army has the Masters of the Warp rule. So in a way, this is like their chapter doctrine, because they have to be played as a mono army to gain this ability. So if you want to benefit from this ability, then you have to play pure Grey Knights. So within the Masters of the Warp ability, there are 4 abilities that are called Tides of the Warp. So again, it's very similar to Space Marine's combat doctrines, but in a way it's actually better because you can choose which Tide of the Warp you start the game in, unlike combat doctrines where you have to start in Devastator Doctrine. And the way that the army changes its Tide of the Warp is either by picking one at the beginning of the battle round, or by using a psychic power that will allow you to pick which Tide of the Warp you now want your army to benefit from. So the first Tide of the Warp is called Tide of Fury. This ability allows infantry that are using Nemesis weapons to reroll wound rolls of 1 for those Nemesis weapons. For the purposes of this rule, all weapons that have Nemesis in its name are considered Nemesis weapons, and it also includes some relic weapons like the Titan Sword. The second Tide is Tide of Convergence. This Tide gives +1 to strength and damage of psi weapons being used by infantry. And for the purpose of this rule, psi weapons are any weapons that have psi in its name, like psi cannon for example, but also includes any weapons that are currently being affected by the psi bolt ammunition stratagem. Meaning you could have a big blob of Terminators, Stormbolters count as psi weapons, and they would then become strength 6, -2 AP, and have a flat 2 damage. That actually sounds pretty nutty, especially in the Space Marine meta, since that sounds like a Primaris killing weapon to me. The third Tide is called Tide of Shadows. This ability gives cover to your entire army. It makes each unit that is entirely on or within a terrain piece -1 to hit. So pretty much the Raven Guard chapter tactic, but better. This is hands down the best Tide to start off with if you lost the roll to go first. This way your army can be as durable as possible to hopefully survive that turn 1 Alpha Strike, and then on your turn, use the spell to switch the Tide to something else that's more useful, like the Tide of Convergence, which I will now just refer to as the Psi Tide from now on. This would also be a great Tide to use if you have Storm Ravens, since if you start them on a terrain piece, they will be -2 to hit and add a 2-up armor save. So Storm Ravens might actually be played now. And the fourth and final Tide is called Tide of Escalation. This Tide makes it so that all Grey Knight smites count as 2 damage instead of 1. This arguably takes Grey Knights from having the worst smites in the game to possibly the best smites in the game, depending on how you look at it. Sure, their smites are still short range, but with all of the deep striking they can do, they now have the most consistent smites in the game. Anybody else feel some deja vu? Anyways, with having 2 flat damage for your smites, you don't have to worry about rolling 1s on your D3 smites like other armies. You just get a flat 2 damage for smite each time. Pretty nifty, and could definitely help in the Space Marine meta that is filled with 2 and 4 wound models like Primaris Marines and Centurions. So out of all of these tides, I think the Psi Tide, Cover Tide, and Smite Tide are the best depending on the situation. Cover Tide is the best tide to start the game in if you don't go first. Psi Tide is the best if you're spamming Psi weapons and have a big unit of Paladins to use Psi Bolt ammo on. And the Smite Tide is probably the best if you're up against something like Custodes who have a lot of 3-up and vulnerable saves that are hard to chew through with your Psi Bolt stuff. The Nemesis Tide can be useful as well, but I think it's the least practical out of all your tides since it requires you to be in melee, and rerolling ones to wound when you only wound on 4s with stuff like Strike Squads or Terminators against stuff like Space Marines isn't that efficient. It's helpful, but not as helpful as other tides. There is a cool combo though that involves the Nemesis Tide and a Stratagem that allows your Paladins to attack while they're dying, so that could be pretty good, especially if they have Hammerhand on them and they're getting +1 to wound. But yeah, we'll get into more of that stuff eventually as we go through the video. Moving on, for new data sheets, Grey Knights get an updated chaplain who has litanies now, and Grey Knights now have their own list of litanies to pick from. A cool thing about this chaplain though is he can know 2 litanies from the list, so he starts out as an upgraded chaplain for free essentially. So Grey Knights have 6 litanies, and most of them look pretty good, but I'm only going to go over the ones that I could see myself personally using in my own Grey Knights army. My favorite litany is probably Invocation of Focus. This litany gives an extra AP to Nemesis and Psi weapons. I think this would work incredibly well on a big blob of Paladins, especially when using Psi Bolt ammunition for them while in the Psi Tide. This means you'll have 40 shots at 24 inches, strength 6, -3 AP, and 2 damage. And if you get into combat as well, they get an extra AP on those melee weapons. Add in Drago for rerolls, and you should be able to kill pretty much anything that isn't an Imperial Knight. Mathematically, you can kill 20 Intercessors with this combo, or 7 Centurions, or 1 Leviathan Dread, or 1 Repulsor Executioner. And that's only considering their shooting. That's not even considering them getting into combat as well. So yeah, they can kill a lot in one turn if given the right situation where they're within charge range, they get all the buffs that they need, and so on. Words of Power seems like another good litany. This litany buffs up 1 unit to reroll their damage for weapons that have random damage like D6 or D3. This would also be good on some Terminators or Paladins since all their Nemesis weapons have D3 damage, so this would make your blob more consistent for damage when against multi-wound models. I think this one is cool and could be useful in some lists, but to be honest, it's not the main one that I would pick. Atonement for Guidance. This litany also buffs up 1 unit, and that unit ignores all hit roll modifiers and ballistic skill modifiers. So no matter what that buffed up unit is shooting at, they will always hit on a 3+. This would be great to take alongside Invocation of Focus when fighting against something like Eldar Flyer Spam. Mathematically, you could kill 2 Crimson Hunters with 10 Paladins, Drago, and a Chaplain. Not bad. It could also help against stuff like Plague Bearers and other units that rely on hit modifiers as their defense. And the last litany I want to talk about is Recitation of Focus. This litany, again, buffs a single unit and gives their bolt weapons and Psi weapons +6 inches of range. I think this is the litany that will be most commonly paired with Invocation of Focus so that you have 30-inch bolters that are -3 AP, strength 6, and 2 damage. But replace this spell with Atonement for Guidance when against Flyer Spam, and replace Invocation of Focus when against something like Plague Bearers where that extra AP doesn't matter anyways. And that's it for the litanies that I like. So let's go over some of the new stratagems that I also like. Transhuman Physiology. This is the same stratagem that all Space Marines now have. It's 2 command points, and you pick one of your infantry units when they're targeted by an attack. And that infantry unit can only be wounded on rolls of 4+ now. So this would work great on Paladins, since a lot of the stuff that takes them down is usually wounding on 3s or 2s, like Storm Cannon Arrays or Butcher Cannons or Thunderhammers. So this stratagem can make your blob of Paladins or even Terminators more durable. Masters of Combat. This stratagem is 2 command points, and you pick a Paladin unit that hasn't attacked yet this phase. And when a model dies, it gets to fight before you remove it. It's kind of pricey at 2 command points, but could be worth it depending on what you're hitting back. It could be okay to combo with Transhuman Physiology, but that's only if you have a ton of command points left, because it would be a pretty hefty combo costing 4 command points. But I do think those 2 stratagems kind of work against each other, since Transhuman is meant to keep them alive, and this stratagem only works when your models actually die. So personally, I think I'd pick one or the other, but usually not both, unless I was in a really bad spot and really needed my Paladins to live, or just get off some extra damage. Basically, the way I look at this is that I'll use Transhuman Physiology if I think that the majority of the models are going to survive and they can be useful next turn. But if I got charged by like the entire enemy army, and even if I use Transhuman Physiology and everything else to buff them up as much as I can, if mathematically they're still probably going to die, then instead of wasting command points on Transhuman Physiology, I would do this one and just get to attack with my guys as they die. Overwhelming Assault. This stratagem is 1 command point and gives +1 attack to a Dread Knight and allows it to reroll wound rolls of 1 in close combat and reroll damage rolls of 1. So with this stratagem and Shock Assault, you can get a Grandmaster and Nemesis Dread Knight to 7 attacks and reroll 1s to wound and 1s for damage. I don't think that needs much explanation. It's more attacks and more consistent damage, so definitely useful. With that said though, based off of all the stuff that like Paladins got in this book and buffs that infantry got in general, I honestly don't think spamming Nemesis Dread Knights are the way to go with the army anymore. If anything, I think I would just take 1 in my list, and the rest of my list would pretty much be all infantry. Dynamic Insertion. So this stratagem is 1 command point and allows you to deep strike a unit just outside of 3 inches from enemy models, but that unit cannot charge that turn. So this could be good for getting in flamer range, or being able to snipe out a target with spells or shooting, or stealing an objective away from your opponent. I read some combos online of people speculating what you can do with this stratagem, but from what I can see, none of it actually works due to restrictions that are in this book. So as far as I'm currently aware, all those things that I mentioned are really the only useful parts of this stratagem that you can use it for. Bring down the beast. For 2 command points, you activate this stratagem after a unit in your army has shot at a vehicle or monster. And for the rest of that phase, the rest of your Grey Knights can reroll wound rolls against that vehicle or monster. So it has a weird condition because you have to have already shot a full unit into that vehicle or monster for this stratagem to then be able to trigger. But there is an easy way to do this, and that's just have a character like Drago just waste his few shots on the target just so the rest of your army can reroll wounds against it. Fury of the Proven. For 1 command point, you can give +1 to hit to a Terminator squad. Paladins have the Terminator keyword, so this works on Paladins. This only makes the combo we talked about earlier slightly better if you have Drago nearby to give full rerolls, but with this stratagem you can now get away with just having a Grandmaster nearby to reroll 1s and you can expect the same result. Another use is to use this in close combat, so you hit on 2s with your halberds or 3 with your hammers. Pretty good. Empiric Surge. For 1 command point, you use this stratagem after a Psyker has successfully cast a spell. Now all Grey Knights within 6 inches of that Psyker gain +1 to cast their spell. This can be really good to make sure you get all your buffs that you want, like Hammer Hand, Sanctuary, or Astral Aim. Redoubtable Defense. This stratagem is either 1 command point or 2 command point depending on the size of the unit you're using it on. So this works on Terminator keyword models, so either Terminators or Paladins. And it's 1 command point if you have 5 or less models in the unit, or 2 command points if you have 6 or more models in the unit. And what this stratagem does is it makes it so that your Terminators or Paladins take 1 less damage from each shot for that phase. So you combine this with Transhuman Physiology, and possibly even Sanctuary on those Paladins, and another spell that makes your opponent -1 to wound from them, and you have 1 incredibly durable unit. And that's it for the stratagems I like. So now moving into the spells before I give my overall thoughts on what combos I think should be used and how the list should be played. Warp Shaping. This spell is Warp Charge 5, and it changes the tide that your army is currently in. This is the only way that you can actually change the tide that your army is in. You don't get to change it for free at the beginning of the battle round. Originally, I thought that was the case, but then I realized how broken it would be to just let your opponent go first and you start in the cover tide, then on your turn switch to a damage tide, then when it goes back to your opponent's turn at the beginning of the next battle round, you go back to the cover tide, and then you'd repeat that for the rest of the game. So to be honest, it would be kind of broken, so I can understand why the only way to change it is with this spell. With that said, you have to make sure that this spell doesn't get denied if you really want to change it to one of the damage tides or back to one of the defensive tides. Armored Resilience. This spell is Warp Charge 6 and it makes a unit -1 to wound. So plop this on the Paladin unit that I've been talking about all video, and that durable unit just becomes more durable. Ethereal Manipulation. This spell is Warp Charge 7, and this allows a unit to reroll hit rolls when they shoot if their target is within half of their range. Edict Imperator, I think that's it, I don't know. This spell is Warp Charge 7, and you pick a friendly Grey Knight unit within 12 inches of the Psyker. That unit can shoot as if it were the shooting phase, and then move as if it were the movement phase, but they can't advance during this move, and that unit can't shoot again or charge during this turn. This again would be great on Paladins, especially if you go with the Litany for +6 inch range on their guns. Walk them up the board and just start blasting stuff, and then get free movement after it to either hide your models so they can't be shot, or just get up the board quicker so you can eventually get into glorious melee combat. Empyrean Domination. This spell is Warp Charge 5, and it gives you 1 command point. Simple yet effective way of farming up some command points that Grey Knights desperately need. Originally, when I was going through the rules before I came to this spell, I figured that the army would just run through command points so quickly, and to be honest, they still will, but this will at least be able to get them one easy command point every turn. So as long as you're not lucky, this spell can get you 6 free command points throughout the game. That's pretty good. And the last spell is called Inner Fire. It's Warp Charge 5 and only works if you're in combat with an enemy unit. So you roll a number of dice equal to the result of the cast. So if you rolled a 10 to cast your spell, then you roll 10 dice. And for each roll of 1, your Psyker suffers a mortal wound. But for each roll of 3+, you do a mortal wound to the enemy that you're in combat with. And that's it for the spells. Pretty much every spell that Grey Knights get in this book is useful, which is great. As for relics, there's only one that I really want to mention, and that's the Sanctic Shard. This relic allows the bearer to reroll psychic tests and gain +1 to all their casts. So that's it for everything that Grey Knights received in this update, other than a couple of stratagems and stuff that I left out. There aren't any warlord traits that I can see unless I somehow missed them, so that pretty much covers everything. So now let's get into my final thoughts on this update for GKs, and how I think they should be played going forward in some of the combos that you can do. So like I said earlier, with all the stratagems and spells that work on paladins, this is how I think I would build my own Grey Knights list. So the idea is you take 2 battalions, so you get 13 command points altogether. For spells, you take Hammer Hand on the Paladins, Astral Aim and Sanctuary on Drago, Empyrean Culmination on the Chaplain for the 1 command point a turn, Warp Shaping on 3 of the strike squads, Gate of Infinity on the other 3 strike squads, Vortex of Doom on the Purgation squads, either Sanctuary or Vortex of Doom on the Grandmaster, and Warp Shaping, Armored Resilience, and Edict Imperator on Voldus. For the Warlord, I haven't decided what I like better, but it's a toss-up between First of the Fray on the Chaplain or Lore Master on the Chaplain. I think I'm leaning more towards First of the Fray though. For the Relic, I would take the new one that gives +1 to cast and lets you reroll spells, and I'd put it on the Chaplain. Since you kind of want the Chaplain to easily get off that one spell that will trigger the Stratagem to be able to give +1 to cast for all your Grey Knight units within 6 inches, and he should be hanging around your other characters and the Paladins, so all of them should get +1 to cast. So that's the little combo that I like to start your whole your psychic phase with. Unless of course your opponent has some stuff that's in denial range, then you may want to mix and match and figure out which spells you definitely need to go off just in case they do get lucky and start denying stuff. So yeah, that's going to be something that you have to figure out for yourself. But yeah, you're going to have to figure out which spells you need to do and which ones you don't necessarily need, and try to bait out their denies on other spells, and yeah. Anyways, to summarize all the stuff that you can actually do with these Paladins and why I love them so much now, you can get them up to a +1 save, 4+ invulnerable save, -1 to hit them, -1 to wound them, they can only be wounded on a 4+, -1 damage from enemy weapons, +1 to hit, +6 inch range on bolters, ignoring line of sight and cover, strength 6, -3 AP and 2 damage storm bolters, they can shoot in the psychic phase and then move after shooting, they can have +1 in close combat, and they can attack while they die in close combat. These are all, of course, a combination of stratagems and spells that you can use to buff the crap out of these guys. Also, the Purgation squads would be pretty good as well. Coming in from Deep Strike, you use the stratagem to put them into Deep Strike, bring them in next to the Nemesis Grandmaster, who can come in and give them rerolls of 1. Unless you can put them in a good spot near Drago so he can give them full rerolls. And then you go into the Psi Tide and you just start blowing stuff away. Overall, I think this list that you see on screen right now would actually be incredibly strong, and I think I might even buy the units I need to finish this list off with my current Grey Knight stuff, since it looks like a lot of fun to play, and I honestly really miss playing my Grey Knights, since they've just been collecting dust for a long time, since they were honestly one of the weaker armies in the game. And as a competitive player who normally only plays for practice for tournaments or playing in tournaments, I had no reason to ever play my Grey Knights. But now with this book, there is definitely a reason to play my Grey Knights, and I definitely want to test them out some more, figure out how much I like them, what I don't like about them, maybe change this list up a bit, because this is just like theory crafting. I haven't been able to test anything out yet. But overall, I like what I see, and I definitely think Grey Knights are going to be a strong army now. Probably not top tier, since stuff like a Thunderfire Cannon or Infiltrators can screw up this list pretty damn hard. But other than that, I think this army has the tools now to actually compete. I'm incredibly happy about this update, because even if Grey Knights aren't top tier, they're at least playable, which is something that Grey Knight players have been wanting for a long time. And to be honest, I never thought I'd see this day, but here we are. So if you're a Grey Knight player, then I suggest picking up this book, because you might actually enjoy playing your army again. And with that said, that's going to be it for this video and my first impressions of the new Grey Knight rules from Ritual of the Damned. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please hit that like button since it helps out with the YouTube algorithm. And also, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon if you want to be notified when I make new videos. Alongside review videos, I also make videos going over meta armies and lists, and also guides for how to improve your 40k gaming skills and knowledge. So with that said, thanks to all my current patrons, you guys and gals are awesome, and thanks to all of you for watching the video. And I will see you in the next one. Happy wargaming.